This is lesson 2-1, adding rational numbers. First, let's talk about a couple of properties. The identity property of addition says for every real number n plus 0 equals n, and 0 plus n equals n. So let's look at some examples before we talk about this. One example might be 5 plus 0 equals 5, or you could say 0 plus negative 5 equals negative 5. So all this property is that if we add 0 to any number, the number doesn't change. It stays exactly the same. So because when we're adding 0, we're not changing anything. You're not really adding anything. You're adding nothing, so your number doesn't change. The way I like to remember is, since it's called the identity property of addition, first of all, yeah, we're adding, so there's that addition part. But it's the identity property because the identity of the number does not get changed by adding 0. The number stays exactly the same. So that's how I remember it. The additive inverse is the opposite of a number. So, for example, just like up here in this example, 5 and negative 5 would be the additive inverses of each other. They're the opposites of each other. And we need to know that for this next property, the inverse property of addition. It says for every real number n, there is an additive inverse negative n, so they're opposites of each other, positive and negative n, such that n plus negative n equals 0. Just like if I take my 5 plus negative 5, I get 0. Or negative 4 plus 4 is also 0. If you add the additive inverses together, you'll always get 0. So it's called the inverse property of addition because you're adding the inverse of each other. 5 and negative 5, they are the additive inverses. When you add them, you get 0. So it's the inverse property of addition. Example 1, using a number line model. Use a number line to simplify each expression. So we have this expression, 3 plus negative 5. Well, 3 is my first number, so that's where I'm going to start, at 3. Plus negative 5, the negative tells me to go left. So I'm going to go left 5 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Left 5 times brings me to this answer, negative 2. So the answer is negative 2. B, negative 3 plus 5. So negative 3 is where I start, negative 3. Plus 5, this plus sign tells me to go to the right. My numbers are getting bigger. Positive, plus, to the right. Then I'm going to move to the right 5 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And we stop at 2 this time. Therefore, negative 3 plus 5 is 2. On C, negative 3 plus negative 5. Starting at negative 3. And then that negative 5, that negative tells me to go to the left. So I'm going to go to the left 5 times. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I end up at negative 8. So let's take a minute to look at these answers that we got. Isn't it interesting that we got 2's here? One positive, one negative, so they're the additive inverses of each other. But both of these answers were 2's, and then this one was 8. We want to know why are these 2's and this one 8. Well, let's look at the signs in our add-ins. Let's look at the signs in our expressions. So every time it's 3, 5, 3, 5, 3, and 5. Those are the only numbers we deal with, yet sometimes we get 2, and this last time we got 8. So let's look at why. This is 3 plus negative 5. We have a positive and a negative. Oh, same thing here. Positive 5, negative 3. So one positive, one negative. One positive, one negative. But if you look at C, they're both negative. And we know that if we were adding two positive numbers, 3 plus 5, we'd get positive 8. So when they have the same signs, what did we do? When they have the same signs, both negative, we add and keep the sign. When they have the same sign, both positive, this we already know, we add them and we keep the sign. So this is just a totally normal problem that I'm sure you're used to by now. Of course, we're throwing in the negatives here to make it a little more complicated. This should be real simple for you. Same signs, add them together, we kept the sign. We do the same thing with negative numbers. If we have two negative numbers, add them together and keep the sign. So here's where the new tricky part comes in. When they have different signs, positive and negative, a negative, a positive. When they have different signs, you have to subtract the numbers. 5 minus 3 is 2. And then we always kept the sign of the larger absolute value. So if we ignore the negative, then we know 5 is bigger than 3. And ignoring the negative is the same as doing the absolute value of negative 5 is 5. So the absolute value of negative 5 is 5. The absolute value of 3 is 3. So which one has the larger absolute value? Negative 5. And so we kept that sign. Do the same thing on B. Again, we ignore the negative, or we're finding the absolute value of each number. And the one with the larger absolute value is 5. So we keep that sign of a positive 2. And that's where these two properties come from, is from what we just looked at. So let's look at these two properties, or rules. The first rule is adding numbers with the same sign. So that'd be like this problem down here. They have the same signs. What do? We added them together and we kept the sign. And that's really what this says. It just says it a little more wordy. To add two numbers with the same sign, add their absolute values. That's what we did. The absolute value of negative 3 plus the absolute value of negative 5. Well, the absolute value of negative 3 is 3 plus the absolute value of 5 is 5. So it's just like adding 3 plus 5. The sum has the same sign as the add-in. So our answer, the sum, was negative because our add-ins were negative. Here the sum was positive because our add-ins were positive. So I like to shorten it. Instead of all these words, I like to say add and keep the sign. And let's look at a couple examples. If we add 2 plus 6, they're both positive. So add them together, keep the sign, so the answer is positive. Here we have negative 2 plus negative 6. Now they're both negative. So we add them. 2 plus 6 is 8, and keep the sign. They're both negative, so my answer is negative. That's what I mean by add and keep the sign. Just add your numbers together and keep whatever sign your two add-ins had. Both positive, answer is positive. Both negative, your answer is negative. And we have adding numbers with different signs. To add two numbers with different signs, find the difference of their absolute values. Find the difference of their absolute values. So here we were adding them, and we're finding the difference of their absolute values. The sum is the same sign as the add-in with the greater absolute value. So again, real wordy. This is totally true and said very well, but very wordy. So let's look back at what we did. When we had numbers with different signs, one positive, one negative, we subtracted. 5 minus 3 is 2. 5 minus 3 is 2. And then we always kept the sign of the number with a larger absolute value. So again, the absolute value of negative 5 is 5. The absolute value of 3 is 3. Which one has the larger absolute value? 5 does. So negative 5 does. And it's negative, so our answer is negative. So I like to say subtract and keep the sign of the larger number. And larger is in quotes because we know that if it's negative, like negative 5 isn't bigger than 3. So it's in quotes because we ignore the negatives when we're trying to determine which one's bigger. That's really what absolute value is. It's ignoring the negatives. When you take the absolute value of a number, there aren't ever any negatives. So we're ignoring the negative. Which one's bigger? 5 is bigger. It's negative, so the answer's negative. And that's all that means. Let's apply that to these next two problems. Simplify each expression. So we always ask ourselves, the number one question is, same sign, or different signs? That's the first question we want to ask ourselves. These numbers have the same sign or different signs. Positive 12, negative 23. So they have different signs in this case. When they have different signs, you have to find the difference or subtract. So I subtract the quote-unquote larger number minus the smaller number. Now, it's in quotes because negative 23 is not actually larger than 12, but if we ignore the negative, it is. So we do 23 minus 12. 3 minus 2 is 1. 2 minus 1 is 1. So that's 11. And then keep the sign of the number with the larger absolute value. So which number is bigger? Ignoring the negative, is 23 or 12 bigger? 23 is, it's negative, so our answer is negative. Let's try that again on B. So we're going to know same sign or different signs, and then once you figure out that, are you adding or subtracting? And you know if they have different signs, you subtract, which is what we did. So let's look at B. Always. First question, same sign or different sign? Negative, negative. So the same signs. The same signs we add. So we're going to add on this one. Ignoring the negative, 6 and 4/10 plus 8 and 6/10. Remember to line up your decimals. 4 plus 6 is 10. Carry the 1. Bring down my decimal. 8 plus 6 is 14 plus 1 is 15. So it's 15 or 15.0. Either one is fine. And then remember that you keep the sign of your add-in. So if both of your numbers are negative, your answer has to be negative. Let's try a couple more of those. So again, same things over and over. First, same sign or different sign? Same sign. So both negative. And they're the same sign we add. 7 plus 4 is 11. They're both negative, so my answer is negative. B, same sign or different sign? Negative, no negatives. They have different signs, and they have different signs. We subtract. Put the quote-unquote larger number on top. We're ignoring the negatives, and when you ignore the negatives, you can see which one's larger. And then we need to subtract. So I have to borrow from the 6. Bring down my decimal. 13 minus 9 is 4. Can't subtract that. 15 minus 8 is 7. 17 and 4/10. And then keep the sign of the number with a larger absolute value. So ignore the negatives. Which one's bigger? 26.3 is. It's negative, so my answer is negative. On C, now we have to add fractions together. So we know even if these were both positive, we'd have to have a least common denominator before we could add these together. But let's focus on the negatives real quick, and then we'll do that. They have the same signs. They're both negative, so I know my answer is going to be negative. And now I'll find my least common denominator of 4 and 2, which is 4. So I'm leaving this fraction alone. Negative 3/4 plus this fraction I'm multiplying times 2, so it's negative 2/4. And we add them together. Negative 3/4 plus negative 2/4. They have the same signs, so add them together. 3 plus 2 is 5 over. Keep your denominator the same. And then we want to change it to a mixed number, so it's still negative. 4 goes into 5 one time with 1 left over. And finally, D, same sign or different signs. They have different signs, so we're going to subtract. But before we can subtract, we have to have a common denominator. The LCD for 9 and 6 is 18. So I'll have something over 18 plus something else over 18. And it's negative. Keep that negative. Times 2 times 2. 16 times, or 8 times 2 is 16. 6 times 3, 5 times 3 is 15. So we have negative 15. And again, we're subtracting. And we always do larger number minus the smaller number, ignoring the negative. So 16 minus 15 is 1/18. Keep the sign of the number with a larger absolute value, so ignore the negative. What's bigger, 16 or 15? 16 is, it's positive, so our answer is positive, and it's already in simplest form. Example 3. The water level in a lake rose 6 inches and then fell 11 inches. Write an addition statement to find the total change in water level. So I know most people don't like word problems, but come on, not that bad. Look for the keywords. If it rose 6 inches, is that a positive or a negative? Well, if it's going up, it's got to be positive. So start with 6. They want us to write an addition statement, so I know it's going to be 6 plus something. It could be a negative number, it could be a positive, but I know I'm adding because I have to write an addition statement. And then fell 11 inches. So if it's falling, that's got to be a negative. And then they wanted us to find the total change in water level. So we have to take this statement, 6 plus negative 11, and solve it. Same sign or different sign? Positive, negative, so they're different. When they're different, we subtract. 11 minus 6 is 5. And keep the sign of the number with the larger absolute value. So ignore the negative. Which one's bigger? 11 is. It's negative, so is our answer. Example 4, evaluating expressions. Evaluate 3 6/10 plus negative t for t equals negative 1 and 7/10. Evaluate just means solve, but we have to substitute before we can solve. So that's all we're doing. They still want us to get an answer. We just have to substitute first. So we're going to take this negative 1 and 7/10 and plop it right in there for t. But I'm leaving everything else the same. Don't change anything but t to negative 1.7. So 3.6 stays the same. Plus, parentheses, bring this negative down. Notice I haven't changed anything yet, not until I get to the t. Now that I'm at the t, t is negative 1 and 7/10. A lot of people will substitute this wrong because they think this looks weird. They have two negatives next to each other. Well, it is weird, but we can't just ignore it or not do it because it looks weird. We need to mathematically solve it. When you have two negatives next to each other, you can read that first negative as the opposite of. So it's read as the opposite of negative 1 and 7/10. So what's the opposite of negative 1 and 7/10? Well, that would be positive 1 and 7/10. Another way you can look at it is, if you have this negative, or these two negatives, you can take the first one and turn it and put it on top, and then what do you make? A plus sign. So two negatives create a positive sign. The opposite of negative 1.7 is positive 1.7. You can also think of it in terms of English. This is a double negative. When you have a double negative in English, what is it? It's a positive. So for example, if I said, I don't have no dogs, I do not have no dogs, what does that really mean? Well, I'm saying I do not have no dogs. That means I have to have dogs. So that double negative creates actually a positive statement. Well, it's the same thing in math. When you have a double negative, it actually creates a positive. So here's what I like to do on my paper. When I have two negatives, I like to just cross them both and create the addition sign. And so then we just apply our rules. Same sign or different signs, they have the same sign, 3 and 6/10 plus 1 and 7/10, so we need to add them. Make sure you line up your decimals. 6 plus 7 is 13, carry the 1, bring down your decimal. 3 plus 1 plus 1 is 5, so our answer is 5 and 3/10. Both of our add-ins were positive, so our answer is positive. I know that's kind of challenging, so let's try a few more. This time we are substituting negative 7 and 1/10 for t. So the first step is take t and change it into whatever number you're using for t. Leave everything else the same. Then ask yourself, same sign or different sign? These have the same. They're both negative, so I know my answer is negative. And I'm going to add 7 and 1/10 plus 4 and 3/10. We ignore the negatives when we add. So line up your decimals. 1 plus 3 is 4. 7 plus 4 is 11. So negative 11 and 4/10. B, again, leave everything else the same except for t. T is negative 7 and 1/10. So negative 7 and 1/10. That's the only thing I'm changing. Same sign or different signs, they have the same signs. They're both negative, so my answer is negative. And we have to add them together since they have the same sign. So we have 7 and 1/10. And then I have some students ask me, well, where does the 2 go? I know where my decimal is, but does 2 go behind the decimal or in front of the decimal? Well, ask yourself, where is the decimal on 2? There's a cute little phrase you can remember. If you can't find it, where's the decimal? It's behind it. So our decimal is behind the 2, therefore 2 has to go in front of the decimal, and you can add a 0 there if you'd like. 1 plus 0 is 1. Bring down your decimal. 7 plus 2 is 9. So negative 9 and 1/10. C, again, leave everything else the same. Don't change anything but t. So I had to take this negative and bring it down. Everything else has to stay exactly the same. Now t is negative 7 and 1/10. So this is just like the one we just did. Again, remember, a double negative creates a positive. You can imagine taking this negative and turning it and creating your plus sign. You can also remember that it really reads the opposite of negative 7 and 1/10, which would be a positive. And you can just cross your plus signs. So same sign or different signs. Now they're both positive. That means we're just adding 8 and 5/10 plus 7 and 1/10. 5 plus 1 is 6. Bring down the decimal. 8 plus 5 is 15. So 15 and 6/10. Last one on D, same thing. Leave everything else alone. So take this negative, bring it down here. What is T? Negative 7 and 1/10 plus 7 and 49/100. Again, you have this double negative. 2 negatives create a positive. So you can cross them, plus, plus. And same sign or different signs. Now they both have the same signs. They're both positive, so add them up. Make sure you line up your decimal. You can add a 0 if you need to. 9 plus 0 is 9. 4 plus 1 is 5. Bring down your decimal. 7 plus 7 is 14. So 14 and 59 hundredths. Example 5. A scuba diver who is 88 feet below sea level, ooh, that sounds important, 88 feet below sea level, begins to ascend to the surface. Write an expression to represent the diver's depth below sea level after rising any number of feet. So the first thing I'm focused on is that it's 88 feet below. If I'm below sea level is 0, by the way. If I'm below sea level, below 0, then obviously my number is a negative. They're wanting me to write an expression. That's just an equation without an equal sign. There's no equal sign. So I'm writing an expression about the diver's depth. Well, I know he's starting 88 feet below sea level. He's at negative 88. And it says to write an expression to represent the diver's depth below sea level after rising any number of feet. Well, I know here's where he's starting, but what is any number of feet? Remember that when we don't know what it is, it's just a variable. So I'm going to use n for any number of feet. So he's rising, so we're going up, any number of feet. So negative 88 is where he's starting, plus however many feet he rises, n. There's our expressions. There's A. On B, they want us to find the new depth, that's supposed to be a P, the new depth of the scuba diver after rising 37 feet. So now they've told us how much he's risen. Before it was any number of feet. Now we know exactly how many feet he's risen. So again, he starts at negative 88, then he rises 37 feet. If he's going up, that's positive. And then we just apply our rules. Same sign or different signs. They have different signs. One's negative, one's positive. So we subtract. 88 minus 37, 8 minus 7 is 1, 8 minus 3 is 5, so 51. And the 88 is larger, it's negative, so our answer is negative, so negative 51. So where is he? He is, you could say the scuba diver is 51 feet below sea level. And we might want to say, that's great. Okay, before we get to our last example, I want to talk about 2 vocabulary words, matrix and element. A matrix is a rectangular arrangement of numbers in rows and columns. An element is an item in the matrix. So here we have 2 matrices, that's the plural by the way, matrices, and each one of these numbers is an element in our matrix. And we're going to add these 2 matrices. And I know it looks kind of complicated, but it's really very simple. Here's what we're going to do. We're just going to add the elements based on where they are. So negative 6 is in the top left position. I'm going to add it to 7 that's also in the top left position. You just have to add the numbers that are in the exact same spot as each other. So what's negative 6 plus 7? Do they have the same sign or different sign? They have different signs, one negative, one positive, so we subtract. 7 minus 6 is 1. 7's bigger, it's positive, so my answer is positive. Top middle plus top middle, 8 6/10 plus negative 5 4/10. Same sign or different sign? They have different signs, one positive, one negative, so we need to subtract, and I'll subtract down here, 8 6/10 minus 5 4/10. Line up your decimal. 6 minus 4 is 2. 8 minus 5 is 3. So 3 2/10. Which one has the larger absolute value? 8 6/10. It's positive, so my answer is positive. 11 top right plus 2 top right. 11 and 2 have the same signs, so we just add them and we get 13. Let's move to the bottom row now. 2 3/10. Plus 11 1/10. Bottom left plus bottom left. They're in the same spot. Same sign or different signs. These have the same sign, so we just add them. Line up their decimals. 1 plus 3 is 4. Bring down the decimal. 1 plus 2 is 3. 13 4/10. Bottom middle plus bottom middle. 5 plus 3 is 8. And finally, negative 3 plus negative 1, bottom right plus bottom right. They have the same signs, So we add, and they're both negative, so our answer is negative. 3 plus 1 is 4. Negative 4 is our answer. So this whole matrix is your answer. Each element in here has to be correct for your whole matrix to be correct. That is lesson 2-1. Good luck.